Good evening. Welcome. Welcome to the series of e-Symposia that IIT Kharagpur is doing to commemorate the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. And IIT is doing this as an initiative of the Ministry of Education, and they are collaborating with leading universities of the world. Today, we are doing the second of this series of e-Symposia, and the participants that we have today represent the Tufts University, US, the Rabindra Bharati, and also from IIT Kharagpur. Today is also a celebration day. Today is the 74th Independence Day, and we are in a mood of celebration right from the morning. And what could be a better day than today to talk about the philosophies and thoughts of none other than Bapu, who brought us the freedom. So we are really, really extremely lucky that on this auspicious day, on this great day where the whole country celebrates, we are going to talk about Bapu, Mahatma Gandhi, who had not only brought us independence, but who had coined some terms which are so relevant even today. And we are going to talk about some of those like Swavalamban, Atmanirbharta, and the speakers would try and bring in their own field experiences and corporate experiences and try and link up how these evergreen topics which are so relevant today and which will remain relevant for a long time to come, how these were coined so many years back, so many decades back. I would request our director of IIT Kharagpur, Professor V.K. Tiwari, who has kindly joined us to inaugurate this symposium and also give his inaugural address. Over to Professor V.K. Tiwari.
Good evening to all of you, and those in US, good morning. Well, as Professor Chattopadhyay said, this is a day of celebration. So, on the 74th Independence Day of India, I give you our Shubhkamnaएं and hope that each one of you will feel the heat which we are feeling today here, right from the morning, as he said, and celebrate it the whole day. Those who are in the morning there in US, and remember the freedom fighters, because of whom we say that we are independent today. Well, it is so befitting today that we have the series of lectures which the Government of India, Ministry of Education wanted us to have on the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, the Rashtrapita, whom we know, father of the nation, who was not only an individual, is a phenomenon. And I know the philosophies are so great, it is very difficult to say in few words. Everybody will have its own interpretation. And therefore, with all my colleagues over here, I will say that let us inaugurate this symposium and request our learned speakers to place their points of view. I know Professor Partho Ghosh, who has kindly agreed for this lecture. Thank you very much, sir, that you have been always the moment you hear about IIT Kharagpur, you immediately spring up and say, yes, I will be there. I saw you the other day also in the lecture. It was very nice lecture. You had got so much of information from several parts of the world and enlightened us with your lecture there. My own friend, Professor Kanchan Chaudhary, is a good friend of mine. We are friends for the last 30 years or so. And I also know his philosophy and the way he looks at. I am sure that all of us will be benefited by his thoughts on Mahatma Gandhi. I just heard about Arunandaji Bandyopadhyay. Sir, I am very grateful to you that you have agreed from Vishwabharati. I am connected to Vishwabharati in the sense that I am there in that as a visitor's nominee. I have attended last year a couple of meetings. This year, of course, because of the pandemic, we could not attend. But then I also visited long back once, and the last year I have visited several times in a capacity of a visitor's nominee. We will be very much happy to hear each one of you and enlighten ourselves. With this, I thank you very much and welcome each one of you. Thank you.
Duty now to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Partho Ghosh. Partho S. Ghosh is a distinguished professor of practice at Tufts University. He is considered as a true global citizen and also a Renaissance man. He's a policy advisor and a strategist for corporates and governments. He is known worldwide as an innovator of business and economic models and currently enjoys advisory relationships with multiple organizations in more than half a dozen nations. In the last 40 years, as a professional consultant to leaderships of prestigious organizations worldwide, he has been involved in a broad spectrum of strategic and policy issues in technology based industries. He has also done extensive work for heads of nations in assessing a country's competitive advantage in various industries and in defining strategic pathways for accelerated socio-economic development. Working with leaders of MNCs, the basic question that he wishes to address is, could leaderships of MNCs rekindle the spirit of exploration and bottom-up excitement to draw people towards a higher level purpose in creating new knowledge, intensive business models, and industries in the 21st century? In addition, for more than a decade, he has been teaching globalization and economics at the Tufts Gordon Institute, innovation and strategic technologies at the Fletcher School, and leadership at MIT. Recipient of several medals, recently he received the prestigious Distinguished Alumnus Award from Indian Institute of Technology, my institute, and also an honorary DSc from Adamas University for his outstanding professional accomplishments across industries worldwide. I also take immense pleasure in stating that he is the founder mentor of the Partho Ghosh Academy of Leadership at IIT Kharagpur. I would request Professor Anjali Gera Roy, our moderator for this evening from the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, to kindly introduce the topic of Partho Ghosh, and then it will be over to Partho Ghosh.
Good morning, Professor Ghosh. Leaders, there have been many, but there's not been a leader like Mahatma Gandhi. Progress, development, modernization, when those were the mantras bandied about as the unilinear route for developing countries and for newly independent nations, Gandhiji issued a note of warning, a caveat. Progress, development doesn't mean anything unless the fruits of development reach one and all. As we live in the global era, we find that the gap between the global us and the local others has grown more vast than ever before. In the context of the contemporary race towards modernization development, how would you How would you look at Gandhiji's idea of Sarvodaya, which translates as universal uplift or progress for all? The title of his translation of John Ruskin's book, Until This Last, in 1908 in Gujarati. Professor Ghosh, we can't wait to hear what you have to say about Sarvodaya.
Thank you. Dr. V.K. Tiwari, the director of IIT Kharagpur, Shubhrata Chattopadhyay, Anjali Roy, the leadership of IIT, esteemed speakers, and of course participants all over the world. Good evening to those in Asia, in India. Good afternoon to those in Europe, and good morning to those in North America, and good afternoon to those in Africa. I know I have some of my friends joining in for South Africa, and of course South Africa plays a very important role on such a day as well to celebrate the life of Mahatma Gandhi. You know, in reference to Mahatma Ji, I've entitled this talk in name of Beyond Capitalism and Socialism, Making Sarvodaya Work to Enable the Next Ism. So in that spirit, it is indeed a very special privilege and deeply humbling experience of historic proportion to celebrate the 150th anniversary of a personality whose life, whose thoughts, whose beliefs and values, whose actions, even inactions, have given birth to many movements around the world, have inspired giant personalities like Martin Luther King, James Lawson, Nelson Mandela, and many others, all in search of justice and fairness, equity, equilibrium of power around the world in their journey to the mountaintop. The essence of Mahatma Gandhi is captured in a most artistic fashion by Nelson Mandela when he described Gandhi as the sacred warrior in the Time magazine of January 3rd, 2000, which celebrated the people of the century. And he wrote, he dared to exhort nonviolence in a time when the violence of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had exploded on us. He exhorted morality when science, technology, and capitalistic order had made it redundant. He replaced self-interest with group interests without minimizing the importance of self. India is Gandhi's country of birth, South Africa his country of adoption. He was both an Indian and South African citizen. Both countries contributed to his intellectual and moral genius, and he shaped the laboratory of movements in both the colonial theaters. And I really love the term laboratory of movements because his life was all about experiments with truth, and in the process he continuously searched what is good for the undivided India, what is good for humanity. Then approximately 40 years earlier, Martin Luther King Jr. in a note wrote, I came to see for the first time that the Christian doctrine of love operating through the Gandhian method of nonviolence was one of the most potent weapons available to oppressed people in the struggle for the freedom. On such auspicious day, before I reflect on Mahatma's journey through life, may I first pay tribute with deepest level of reverence to the thousands of leaders, the people who lost their lives in Hijli jail, the social reformers, and millions of freedom fighters of the subcontinent who dedicated their lives to fight India's independence. Many of them played equally distinguished role as Gandhi, often followed different strategic and tactical routes that of Mahatma in securing India's liberation, as well as suffering the subcontinent's partition, an unintended consequence of how the complex path of freedom movement evolved and got shaped in various parts of pre-independent India. It is particularly a great honor for me to pay tribute to a personality who dedicated his life in the most selfless fashion in the independence of the subcontinent on a day which celebrates the 74th Independence Day. Many in the subcontinent view the Independence Day with tempered enthusiasm as it lost also led to the partition of a region of the world which for more than 5,000 years experimented with the fundamental thoughts and defined civilization today, which housed the first two learning centers, universities of the world. The first one in Taxila, as you know, established in 500 BC, and the second one in Nalanda in the Gangetic Plain. In fact, over several millenniums, between these two universities, dozens of learning centers between the two river systems from our Himalayas inspired rich scientific, mathematical, and spiritual ferment that defined Indian philosophy, which in turn influenced modern thought leaders in India like Tagore, Vivekananda, and Mahatma Gandhi. So when we talk about Mahatma, we are talking about 5,000 years of Indian experiments, and that is what we have to take forward in creating a better humanity. It is my hope that the government of India's noble initiative, with the support of IIT Kharagpur, to conduct 150 lectures, symposia in 150 foreign universities to reflect on Gandhian thought and philosophy, will not only pay tribute to Mahatma Gandhi's life, but together the lectures will offer hope and glory to our civilization and offer us the courage to define a path, what I will term the enlightened society. Particularly at a time when COVID-19 assault on human health continued to be serious. Some say it could last about 3 years and it may be temporary, but the political and economic upheaval it has unleashed could last for generations. So we do need generational shift, and some of the words of Mahatma Gandhi could indeed play a very important role. It is important to recognize the underlying problems, such as the socioeconomic divide, the decadence in human conscience, the deteriorating ecological balance, declining ethics, increasing distrust of society and institutions, which have been making for the last 2 or 3 decades, have now become more visible, which we could no longer afford to neglect. Given this backdrop, it is an opportune time to discuss how we could resurrect 4 legendary principles of Gandhian philosophy, namely Satya, truth, Ahimsa, non-violence, Sarvodaya, upliftment for all, and Satyagraha, search for truth, which along with Shavalambi and Shachada are all very contextual and relevant today. Before I get to the core of the subject, which is on Sarvodaya, I would like to reflect a little bit about Gandhi's journey through the freedom movement, because that shaped the principles of Sarvodaya. As you know, Gandhi's journey began in Porbandar, where he was born, through Bombay to Inner Temple in London to become a barrister, then to Durban in South Africa to practice law, where his experience with and fight against racism brought him back to India to find his own inner temple, own inner mind to experiment with truth, defining his sacred role to serve the freedom movement of India, which was indeed complex. As you know, his life was inspired by philosophers like Henry Thoreau through his book On the Duty of Civil Disobedience, William Slater's Ethical Religion, John Ruskin's Unto This Last, Leo Tolstoy's Kingdom is Within You, and Tagore's Gitanjali, and of course, India's sacred book, Gita. And many of the terms such as Ahimsa, Swaraj, Satyagraha, Sarvodaya were shaped by these books, which he stood for all his life. Known for different experiments with himself, a decent number of trials and errors in rationalizing and pursuing nonviolence, exhibited definitely a certain degree of inconsistency, often in conflict with alternate thoughts, a natural phenomena when one is experimental mode, and when the theaters of Indian freedom movement was continuously evolving and going through different twists and turns. For me, Mahatma, like many others, did play a significant role in the freedom of the nation, but the approaches, the rhetoric that emerged did create multiple splits in the freedom movement of the subcontinent. Though unintended, led to split up of the ancient civilization, which was indeed a serious assault to his long heritage which continues to be a drag on the socio-economic development of the region. This naturally leads to me to the center of what I will talk is the Gandhian Economics and how could we advance the essentials of Sarvodaya. Personally, as an engineer, as an economist, as an educationist, above all as a humble public servant, the term Sarvodaya has a very special appeal, particularly at a time when both socialism, as we know, in the USSR and Eastern Europe did not work, capitalism, with the accelerating gap between rich and poor, is becoming increasingly questioned today. While different shades of state-guided socialistic capitalism, or you can call it capitalistic socialism, as we have witnessed in East Asia, Southeast Asia, Scandinavian nations, and also a little bit in Germany, seem to have found a more balanced economic mechanics, but yet in the name of state intervention, they have been suspect from free market believers. As some of you know, for less developed nations like India, over the past 25 years or so, I've advocated the socio-economic programs of nation should be human-centered, agro-based with villages and towns, not big cities, and the centers of economic excellence should move away from brown and carbon economy to green and gold. By gold, I mean sunlight economy, with a higher level of emphasis on ethics, ecological balance, and equity. And that's why, by the way, we have the Leadership Academy of IIT Kharagpur, the first of the kind, which hopefully will serve the nation, serve the world to create this new world. In that spirit, the term Sarvodaya movement, involving creation of network of self-promoting village communities in the country like India, had a very special meaning in my heart. And hopefully we could resurrect the essence of Sarvodaya in today's context. Sarvodaya is a word Gandhi invented from two Sanskrit roots, sarva, all, udaya, uplift, basically meaning upliftment for all, but more importantly, the good of the individual is contained in the good of all, captures that spirit. Mahatma viewed Sarvodaya as economic construct for the service of common welfare, away from the politics of power and exploitation. It put major emphasis on moral and spiritual values. It aspired to create new social and economic values by promoting the concept of trusteeship above the concept of ownership or possession. People will work for the good of all, and family feeling must spread across the entire community with full emphasis on freedom, fellowship, and equality. So it's on one side socialistic, yet it talks about freedom. The requirements of the village will be determined by the people of the village themselves through a village council. Both Tagore and Gandhi understood, and this is a very important point, that colonialism is an internal psychological constraint, which we still suffer from, as opposed to external imposition of outside power. So it is through the surgery in our hearts we can make a change. And in that context, I believe Sarvodaya could have enabled upliftment of the confidence in the minds of a common Indian. It is important to note Sarvodaya has the positive elements of capitalism, which is freedom of choice, socialism, work for social good, communism, community-centered, with the power of governance that is bottom-up, not top-down, and ownership, which is in the community, neither with the individuals nor with the central government. In order to appreciate its relevance for the current economic system, the question that has been posed, let me briefly explore with you how Sarvodaya concept compares with the thoughts of few of the European thought leaders like John Locke, Adam Smith, the father of modern economics, Karl Marx, and Charles Darwin, all of whom, as you know, had directly and indirectly influenced modern world's business and economic constructs. Beginning with John Locke, the leader of the Scottish Enlightenment, who agreed that sovereignty resides in the people and explains the nature of legitimate government in terms of natural rights and social contract. Later, Adam Smith, growing up under the tutelage or under the shadows of Locke, in his book on Theory of Moral Sentiments and Wealth of Nations, particularly underscored and it's very important to note this, no society can surely be flourishing and happy of which the far greater part of the members are poor and miserable. And unfortunately, that is the state in India. So in that spirit, again, Sarvada has a very, very special role to play. In fact, Adam Smith, 200 years earlier to Gandhi, believed the great task of scholars to be the discovery of unwavering natural laws that determine individual social and natural behavior and firmly underscored the universality of human nature, which is also the central thesis of Sarvada. Smith also rejected imperialism and slavery on economic and moral grounds, in line with how Gandhi and Tagore viewed the DNA of a healthy society in India. In that spirit, in 1863, in his book, Das Kapital, Karl Marx expressed the worker becomes ever a cheaper commodity that more commodities he creates. With the increasing value of the world of things proceeds in direct proportion to the devaluation of the world of men, expressing concern for the worker, challenging the role of the capitalist. So as you could see, while all the philosophers of Europe between the 18th and 20th century, like Gandhi, like Tagore, and many other thought leaders in that period, focused on the well-being of the individual, well-being of the common man, Gandhian Sarvodaya was, however, in conflict with Adam Smith's emphasis on the power of self-interest as opposed to Gandhi's power of selflessness. Karl Marx's thesis of natural struggle between capital and labor, accordingly the stronger role of the central government, and Charles Darwin in Survival of the Fittest, which also influenced the economic principle leading to Schumpeter's thoughts on creative destruction. So what I find interesting, yet there were a lot of similarities between the thought leaders of Europe and how Gandhi was thinking about the future. Yet on some fundamental points, there was a significant difference. And that's what we have to understand. And these differences is in terms of how they viewed the role and the power of the self, Atma, and where the power of the resource allocation should be located in society. And that's where the thoughts varied deeply. Adam Smith, as you know, believed in self-interest as a rich natural resource and believed in the power of market forces as the best allocator of those resources. And in fact, he made two very powerful statements, which is very different from the Gandhian model. Society cannot rest its future on the noblest motives, but use the strongest motives in the best possible way. So Adam Smith's approach was extremely practical, focusing on the strongest motives as opposed to the noblest one, while the Gandhian model required morality and selflessness as the driver, and which is the most fundamental thought of the Gandhian economics. Furthermore, Adam Smith also said virtue is more to be feared than vice. Very important point. Virtue is to be more feared than vice because its excesses are not subject to the regulation of conscience. Who decides? The question is who decides what is moral and what is the organizational unit that dispenses judgment and morality becomes gradually more powerful. It's a very important point to keep in mind when we build a society based on morality and virtue. How do we create the governance process? That's something the world has not yet thought of, and that's where I think a leadership academy at IIT should start working on. Karl Marx, on the other hand, in order to offset the devaluation of the world of men, was a big proponent, as you know, of strong central government. The power of resource allocation must reside with the government, and viewed labor as a source of production whose right and dignity should be protected by strong government. In contrast, Gandhi, in view of his observation of wealth and poverty, viewed labor and capital as complementary, not adversarial, and led him to develop the concept of trusteeship based on the belief that there is no private ownership of capital. It is the commonwealth of the community that should be kept in the trust for redistribution and equalization of lifestyles. Similarly, while recognizing difference in aptitudes, skills, talents of individual as gifts from God should be used for the collective good of society. Different from the capitalistic or communistic system, Gandhi was a proponent of socio-economic order which Sarvodaya based on non-violence, ahimsa, where not competition, and selflessness and service. So this is where it is fundamentally different. And that's where I think India has a great opportunity. IIT Kharagpur has a great opportunity. The Leadership Academy has a great opportunity to create the next phase of economic development of the world. So that leads to my last point, making Sarvodaya work as the next ism. So if I really summarize, in essence, I view Mahatma Gandhi's Sarvodaya as the nextism, as the ultimate enlightened state that humanity should pursue towards, based on a fundamental belief of Gandhi, that planet provides us enough to satisfy our needs, but not for everyone, man's greed. In such an enlightened state, every member of the society will be free from any greed for limitless acquisition of material wealth, free from luxurious living. Simple living and high thinking should be the ultimate aspiration of every individual, which, by the way, Gita has preached for thousands of years. When the fundamentals of Sarvodaya is viewed from a perspective of how today's economic processes work, it is extremely idealistic, unrealistically noble, in short, not practical. And that is our challenge to how to make it practical. Philosophically, it is more robust compared to the alternative economic constructs that humanity has practiced, which definitely propelled technological progress of civilization in the last 500 years, enabling economic benefit for the top 30% of the global population, has left behind the bottom 60%, but have created a tremendous amount of stresses and strains in the geoeconomic, geopolitical, and geoecological systems of the planet. That makes our civilization extremely fragile and vulnerable. So the big question in front of us this morning in Boston, in evening in Kharagpur, beyond just appreciating the elegance of Mahatma's Sarvodaya system, what must we do to practice some of the fundamental tenets at a time when the global economic environment is fundamentally programmed differently? It's fundamentally programmed. The algorithms are different. Today, we live and work in a global economic system, as you know, which encourages consumption over conservation, where greed is considered to be a powerful economic force, where society rewards quick gains over pains to address long-range issues, such as global warming. Productivity gains through intelligent deployment of technology triumph over job creation, where we have measured success through financial metrics such as return on investment, where education system is designed to help students to play the zero-sum game, either to find jobs or to become entrepreneurs to serve current economic constructs. In the process, we make the global system we have now even work faster and better, while humanity becomes increasingly more vicious and feeble, and the planet is becoming more vulnerable and fragile. First, we must realize the global civilization has arrived at a point of inflection when we need to change and we need a fundamental departure. Second, less developed nations which have not benefited from the current economic system at work, like India, must cultivate the will to explore the alternative possibilities, because we are less entrenched in the current global economic system just because we are less economically active in the global economic setup. And third, we have to be extremely innovative, extremely courageous to explore alternative economic constructs, such as Sarvodaya, by answering the several fundamental questions to make Sarvodaya work today. First, could the current economic system, which is the antithesis of the concept of Sarvodaya, which is based on morality, ethics, and tempered greed or zero greed, are at the heart of this model. Could it be repurposed? Or could we create a parallel system so we could systematically transplant the specific economic activities from the current to the new? So that when villages of India pursues the new approach, how do we transfer economic activities from the centers of the cities into the village or centers of excellence? How should we repurpose the current education system so we can put significantly higher level of emphasis on spiritual development with focus on morality, ethics, in orchestration with intellectual and handicraft skills? As Sarvada underplays self-interest, relies on selflessness and goodness and virtues of human nature. And finally, how do we design a bottom-up resource allocation, problem-solving, ownership process while downsizing top-down administration with significantly more emphasis on strategic guidance so the network of village communities are globally competitive in a nation? That's a fundamental point. If Indian government really wants to take the thoughts of Mahatma forward, we have to think, what would be the new system through which we could, on one side, empower our villages beyond the village panchayats, because that, as you know, did not work, provide confidence to the hearts and minds of the villagers, while the center plays a strategic role in how to transform the system and in the process make the nation competitive. So it is my hope the Academy of Leadership at IIT Kharagpur will address such difficult issues to play such much needed role of the service of the common man. Gandhi believed in human capacity to change, viewed Satyagraha as the real power against the oppressor, not to destroy, but to transform him, and he seizes his oppression, not join the oppressed in the pursuit of truth. In the same spirit, if we truly believe the lessons that we could draw from Sarvada is going to benefit humanity, the current economic system, which might be the direct opposition to the system that we want to create, the goodness of the new system could gradually influence the current system in order to create an enlightened society. This is perhaps today we could offer our reverence to Mahatma. Do we have the will? With that, I would like to thank you very much for the opportunity to share my thoughts on Sarvada and its relevance in modern India, in the civilization, the global civilization, because the global civilization today is indeed hungry for new ideas. And as you know, capitalism is being questioned, socialism did not work. So what is the nextism? Could a nation like India with 1.4 billion people could experiment with the concept of Sarvada as Mahatma Gandhi experimented with truth to create a new world which we are all proud of? With that, I want to thank you very much indeed.
That was amazing. Is there an alternative to the unilinear route to development proposed by the West? Is it possible to practice Sarvodaya in the era of global consumerism? Can Sarvodaya be an alternativism? I haven't come across a more erudite, original, and, if I may say, lucid interpretation of the concept of Sarvodaya. Thank you very much. We will return with some more questions later, but now I request Professor Chattopadhyay, Dean Alumni, to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Arunendu Banerjee.
Very much, Professor Anjali Gera Roy. And I must say, I was fascinated with what Artho S. Ghosh had to say. It was mind-blowing. It was so well put. He had juxtaposed philosophies of different personalities, tried to, get the essence, the points of convergence, as well as he identified the points of divergence. Simply mind-blowing. Thank you very much for that very, very illuminating talk of yours. I have the pleasant duty of introducing our second speaker, who is also a prolific speaker. I mean, I have heard him. I have personally had long chats with him over various subjects, and he can speak on subjects with his original anecdotes, with his original experience put together. He is a real force to reckon with. Ornandu Banerjee, our next speaker, as I said, a prolific speaker and an authority on Rabindranath Tagore. Ornandu Banerjee is consulting engineer, environmental designer, planner, and chief consultant at the STS Systems for many important projects in national and international levels. He is a consultant for restoration, conservation of cultural heritage projects. He's also a museum designer, an artist, a writer, author of many books and articles on Tagore, on Rothindranath, on Abanindranath, on Patrick Geddes, Arthur Geddes, Rachel Carson, and also on Shantiniketan's built environment and campus architecture. He has designed exhibitions on Rabindranath, Rothindranath, on Shantiniketan, Sriniketan, Geddes and Rabindranath, including design of mobile exhibitions on environmental awareness projects, environmental park, river bank projects, and the like. He's a member board of studies at Shilpo Shodhan Vishwabharati. He's also a visiting expert at IIT Kharagpur, and he's a member in the advisory council of the School of Infrastructure Design and Management. He's a member advisory board of Kolkata Museum Society and also the National Library Belvedere House, which is under the Ministry of Culture, Government of India. He has also been consultant on restoration, conservation of heritage projects of Jora Shanko, Tagore Houses, and Indian Botanic, Howrah, Rabindra Bhavan Museum, etc. He's also consultant for many civil, structural, built environmental, architectural projects like Art and Craft Village, Srijoni Shilpogram, which is under the Ministry of Culture, Government of India, Rothindro Utithi Griho, which is a VIP guest house at Vishwabharati, Shonat Tori Housing, Oheli, and many, many more. I invite Ornandu Banerjee, Sri Ornandu Banerjee, to speak on the next topic. But first, I would again invite Professor Anjali Gera Roy to introduce the topic to Sri Ornandu Banerjee, and it will be then over to Ornandu Banerjee.
Good evening, Mr. Banerjee. We live in an increasingly interconnected world, and we've been talking about mutual interdependence. We've been quite drunk with the idea of efficiency introduced by division of labor and mutual interdependence until the last economic crisis in 2008, when Wall Street sneezed. We in India developed a fever. So Gandhiji's words of being self-reliant, which was the motive of the Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi's speech today, Independence Day address, where he harped on the idea of Atmanirbhar, Gandhiji's ideas of being self-reliant or Swavlamban come home to us once again. We would love to have your thoughts on Swavlamban, considering that you have not only been talking about them, but also putting them into practice in your own projects. Mr. Banerjee.
I must say my deep regards, namaskar. In this very auspicious day of Indian independence, we are very fortunate to discuss on Mahatma Gandhi on the year of his 150th birth anniversary. Thanks to IIT Kharagpur for arranging such a wonderful symposium and giving me a kind opportunity to talk here and especially speak on Mahatma. My personal regards to the director IIT Kharagpur, the speakers, moderator, participants, and our dear Professor Subhrata Chattopadhyay. And he talked about me, and thank you, Subhrata, for all this. Well, the village self-rule, self-restraint, Shabulambi Gram Swaraj, is known to us from the ancient civilization of our country, absolute ancient civilization of our country. But Gandhi's central idea and the mission in his life essentially based on this, which express the Atma Shakti, Atmanirbharta, self-ruled, self-sustained villages with people's participatory principle in defined area and structure of practice in lands. It may look like a very simple thing to do in a concept or read in a concept, but it's very difficult to ground it in the practice. We will also discuss this a little later. Now, Gandhiji's this concept was very important to our sustained societal freedom and India's own freedom at that point of time. Also very, very relevant now in the contemporary society, struggling with the present situation in pandemic crisis in this world. All over the places, we have started talking about Atmanirbharta. And how do we achieve it without the understanding of the technicalities and practicalities of Shavalamban? Mahatma Gandhi, it looks like he's going to be bright and brighter in the immediate future and urgent future. Gandhiji believed from his realized and practiced truth. We have seen, at least in this topic, the way he described vividly, without the realization by the practiced truth, it is very difficult to narrate such concept so very simply, so very in a concept which can be applied to our life. Now, this is based on the practiced truth throughout his life, which is based on the moral value, self-purified, meant for the individuals forming into empowered, self-sufficient, self-governed society. This would be the ideal for people's progress in all dimensions of life and livings, with participatory social activities, development from the basic village ground level. The village India was in the center of his logical dream to deed. Now, we have seen from our practice that from I, the transformation to become a we, the society, that is a kind of a bridge which comes from our realized truth. And Gandhiji gives us the rays of inspiration, how to do it, when to do it, and have the inner energy, purified self-soul to connect ourselves to the broader society. We all know that the Hind Swaraj was drafted by him in 1909. Gandhiji further explained his visions on proper picture in the verge of Indian independence in 1946. So this is his time-tested mission of India's own development and progress. His practical vision was independence from the bottom and not just a pyramid growth, with apex sustained from bottom. He had seen by his own experience and reality of our Gram Samaj. The basic strength of India and the needs to the motherland, Bharat, was his mind-minded, soul-searching experience of truth. Large and greater number of people lives in India. When he drafted in 1909, perhaps more than 90% or around 90% Indian population was living in village. In 1946, it may be little less, but grossly India lives and lived in village. He knew this truth. And this is also true even today. Gandhiji's noble idea of development was in this grassrooted, lifeful view of people's collective ownership. I know this is a very difficult, but this is his strength of the truth in reality, the realist truth, that it needs to have the collective ownership. If I don't own a space and collectively own the space for the betterment of a greater society, the space becomes negative. To create a space positive, that is what Gandhiji said, the collective ownership, capacity utilization, converging in land, people, and environmental unity. Here is a time has come to assess under this global crisis, Atmanirbharata, are we really have tested ourselves, our own society of India, that what is the capacity of the society in the innermost core of creativity? Perhaps not, but we are going to definitely do that. That is the Mahatma's vision. Structure of construction and reconstruction of village Swaraj was also explained by him in details. These relevant ideals are based on the humanistic, scientific, and spiritual unity through practiced, realized, and experimented truth. But this convergence is an omnipresent ideal in India from ages. We might have not given the focus to them, but it is there. Maybe latent, but it is there. So Gandhiji stressed on this, the unity of this. And how? Now, it must be realized through the practice and experiment. So when he said the experiment, so it becomes a laboratory. So experimentation takes place in laboratory. So his life was a laboratory. And he has given a new laboratory to work with realized truth and connectivity to the universal truth. Now, this is applicable to any universal soil, more so now, in the serious world level crisis, passing through many drastic changes. Many of them would be the permanent changes in the near future. And where we will get the strength to overcome, it is Shavalamban. It is Atma Shakti of the individual connected with the wider Samaj. And He is the light to take us to the path of that level. Some relevant creativity planning detail were also given by him. When I read it as a very small person, I really admire his pictorial, we call it a word picture, like a brush poem. He had the word poems. The way he narrated, explained the architecture of the built environmental feature, how a country lives, how the Gram Samaj will live, and how they live also. That he knew by heart. What he said, that the village need to have the perfect sanitation. This is the basics of public health and hygiene. The whole world is now facing this. In the habitat planning, in their own built cottages and cleaned village roads, I ask myself quite often, how many of us can build our own house and build our own roads? But I have seen, working with them for the last 20 years in the Adivashi villages, they construct their own cottages. They know how to build the laterite roads, stable. And he thought the materials would be taken and should be available to them within a radius of 5 miles with proper light and ventilation, which is a fundamental of ecology. Most of the villages in India are naturally and traditionally creative. We have seen that. Intelligent and skilled in making their own house and even decorate with wall. We call hire some artists to decorate our interior or exterior. But even today, if we go back and look at the villages, they not only create the cottages, but also decorate it with a wall art, their own expression. So you observe that. Inner courtyard is a vital place. It is said that I'm amazing that, India's inner courtyard, relation of inner courtyard and the outer zone is very important for the Swaraj, the village Swaraj, Gram Swaraj life. What is the interior courtyard? He said that this is a place for their daily life and the living. Mainly the women. We have seen the women. They use the courtyard so well. And plant trees. And sometime it would be trees, the fruit trees, vegetables. They do that. Even today I have seen, today means, these days we have seen that, they do that. They know how to do it and then develop it. Another thing that, adjoining to the inner courtyard, the place for the cattle and their own household livestock. They have a cooperative life within themselves. We call it ecological cooperative or ecologic cooperative. So they live together. And he also added the cooperative dairy, which is quite possible. Khadi, they know how to, they know the textile art and crafts, water well. I tell you one experience. It was created during, I think, Shantiniketan glorious period in one of the tribal hamlet in Shantiniketan. I have seen one water well, so very nicely designed, but simple, elegant. But it has 4 level steps that 4 person at one time can lift water from the water well. I always think that, this kind of installation should be a pride of our own civilization. In spite of his busyness, he was extremely busy fighting, struggling for India's freedom post 1915 until his sudden sunset. But such detail was known to him by heart. And the pond, they can create the pond. He talked about that. The cultural space. We call it a philosophy of leisure. The philosophy of leisure is a structured thing coming to a faculty. But the philosophy of leisure known to them, I'm talking about the people Gandhiji was, lovingly talking about, known to them very traditionally. It is absolute and organic. So he said, that kind of a space should be there for them. And then the defined space for the community worship. In a Adivasi village, it is a than, they call it a than. So it's a worship, space of worship. And there are temples, there are mosques, there are churches in many distant villages in India. We are a combined composite culture. And meeting place of Gram Sabha. Gram Sabha is quite common even today. He also thought about the village school in all level in that, the Gram Swaraj composition with industrial training and education. Of course, the health center for this agri-horticultural farming society. Ideal village would be model village of India with necessary guidance for larger village income, progressing to common sustainability with their own resources. Now, coming to the challenges, with a very realized confidence, Gandhiji also explained the necessity of free and able men and women to hold against anyone in the world by their innovative, honest, and dedicated work for peaceful and productive community life and living. Atmanirbhar Bharat, Shavalambi Bharat will also be the ideal for the participatory democracy, respecting our ancient, inclusive civilization in continuity. This ideal will inspire also the world's aspired and renewed progress, which is so very important now. He also parallelly reminded us, and we also feel today in 2020, it is so very truth. He also reminded 1945, the biggest tragedy is the hopeless unwillingness of the villagers and outside wrong influence. We remember his thoughts on Harijan housing with sanitation and hygiene as essential part of the planning. When he discussed this with Patrick Geddes in Indore, Patrick was then engaged in town planning work there, and Gandhiji came to Indore to inaugurate the Hindi Shammelan. And he had a long discussion, and there are a lot of letters between Patrick Geddes and Gandhiji. Of course, we will discuss in some of the other occasion. Now, the horror of plague epidemic was handled by timely people's participatory planning by the leadership of Geddes in Indore. Glories of planning civilization of India were studied by Geddes before he started his practice and the work in India. That is why he is one of the best friend of India. Although Gandhiji explained that the implementation of such vision may be difficult, even to make India an ideal country with village republic, but this is the real freedom. We need to make sincere efforts in setting example by making at least one model ideal village with a defined expression. The sincere efforts may lead into a pattern of ideal country. Also relevant now in the context of aspired new normal ecologic world, duly adjusting with time, space, and new psychology suiting to time. We may remember Gandhiji, I fondly remember, because of the reason of connectivity, but I will go back to 1915 first. We may remember Gandhiji arrived in Shantiniketan Ashram School in 1915. It's a very, very important period of his time, life in India, from abroad, with his wife and his Phoenix School students. His son was also there with teachers, two great souls of humanity and visionaries, Gandhiji and Rabindranath met. This was also the historical time of future and eternal India. Gandhi Punnaho is observed in Shantiniketan every year on 10th of March, paying respect and tribute to his first visit and stay. It's very interesting that he stayed in the same cottage, he and his students, where Rabindranath in 1901 started the Ashram Brahmacharya Vidyalaya, Ashram School, 1901. Gandhiji coming in the same built environment in 1915 with courtyard, with the kind of a cluster of thatch roof mud-built cottages. To me, it was a sensational pride to participate in the conservation restoration of these very mud-built thatch roof cottage he lived. I also still remember with great gratitude the work of conservation restoration of his original Bengali manuscript, now on display in one of the important museums in Kolkata. It was a great experience of realizing Mahatma, learning language, even in the most turmoil period before the sudden sunset of the great life of humanity. Now, I will end up with some, examples, some experience. The practical experience with the sense of his great idea and ideals, not fully, obviously, of rural level work, were applied, this was applied in possible modest scale and time. In recent years, in Adivashi village, renewal work, creation of folk art and craft village near Shantiniketan, from the basic laterite land to green art craft village, involving creative folk Adivashi skills and minds of 9 states of Eastern India by cooperative community participation. And of course, very, very recently in the Ravindra Bhavan work in Mongpu Hill village with defined and possible scale wherein local village talents performed very intelligently with utmost sincerity, suiting to participatory creative culture of self-sustained Shabulambi Atma Shakti. We could not know such talent of Sitong, Mongpu village, unknown village to us even today. We don't talk about them. But the skill, the women skill, the men skill, in creativity, in creative construction is something very amazing. I'm telling you, because it's a very recent work, we did not take any person from even Shiliguri. We wanted to try and test Mahatmaji, Rabindranath's ideas and ideals that involve the local skill, local talent. You will see the result. Site-specific, local-specific, place-specific. Now, I will end up with this. Let us try to create and recreate at least one Shabulambi Adarsha Gram, respecting Gandhiji's ideals of grass-rooted planning civilization, fitting to the time and space, where two ways learning culture. Maybe we are habituated with the one way, but two ways learning culture with right change in attitude of our mind would make the futuristic built form into the healthy and peaceful life and living. As example of renewed Atmanirbhar Bharat, also maybe the inspired truth for new normal world order. Namaskar.
India lives in its villages, Gandhiji said. What could be better than the smallest unit where India lives, the village, to translate the idea of Swavlamban, which you did beautifully in your talk. We'll return to this in our general panel discussion later. But now I would request Professor Chattopadhyay to introduce our final speaker, Professor Kanchan Chaudhary. We've been so engrossed in the talks that we've seemed to have lost track of time. So that's something our final speaker would probably have to keep in mind so that we have some time for a general discussion towards the end of this symposium.
Professor Anjali Gera Roy, and I must tell you, Orunandu Banerjee never, disappoints. He's always great. He comes up with some original ideas. His way of putting it across, putting examples from different personalities, their meeting, their common points. When Sri Orunandu Banerjee, you've really given us a fantastic journey, fantastic viewpoints. And as a planner, as a physical planner, I feel that there's so much that we could learn and do together. Thank you very much. It's my pleasant duty to introduce our final speaker, Professor Kanchan Chaudhary, my colleague for the last 3 decades and more, who wanted me to make it very brief, but he is a powerhouse speaker. So I will make my introduction short because he wanted it to be short and give him that extra time. Professor Kanchan Chaudhary was born in Assam. Kanchan Chaudhary obtained a bachelor in mechanical engineering and doctorate in cryogenic engineering from IIT Kharagpur. He did his postdoctoral research in Germany and the USA. He's a faculty member of IIT Kharagpur for the last 36 years. Professor Chaudhary maintains close professional contact with the industry. He is a firm believer in the eternal knowledge of India embedded in Gita. Upanishads, Ramayana, and the Mahabharata. And interestingly, he also heads the Partho Ghosh Academy of Leadership at IIT Kharagpur. I would request Professor Anjali Gera Roy to quickly introduce the topic, and then it will be over to Professor Kanchan Chaudhary.
Chattopadhyay. I would also not like to cut into Professor Chaudhary's time. And without further ado, I would request him to share his thoughts on Gandhian thoughts and philosophy, with a request that as a host speaker, if you could kindly keep your talk to 15 minutes or even less if possible, so that we have some time for discussion and Q&A at the end of the symposium before we close. Professor Chaudhary.
Namaskar. Mukum karoti vachalam pungum langhayate girim jat kripa tamoham vande paramananda madhava. Director Professor V.K. Tiwari, Deputy Director Professor Bhattacharya, Registrar Professor B.N. Singh, the speakers Professor Partha Ghosh, Professor Anunendu Banerjee, Professor Subrata Chattopadhyay, and moderator Professor Anjali Gera. I thank you all and the organizers of this symposium, this webinar, to give me an opportunity to speak to you on Mahatma Gandhi on the occasion of 150 years of his birth celebration on a day that is as auspicious as the Independence Day of India 2020. Mahatma Gandhi's leadership influenced the thought process of the entire world. It is an understatement to say that he had been instrumental in getting freedom for India from the British, but that his ideology inspired freedom from South Africa in a non-violent way. The influence of his life and work on humanity would continue to get evaluated and appreciated in the centuries and millenniums to come. More than a person, Gandhi is a vast idea himself that encompasses philosophy, religion, culture, art, literature, science, economics, politics, sociology, and education. Ladies and gentlemen who are today viewing this webinar, thank you very much for listening to these speeches. And when you are listening about Gandhi, it must be a fact that you have got great regards to this greatest leader born in the last many centuries. And all of us, in the core of the heart, want some bit of Gandhi in us. And when you recall, when it comes to the leadership on the political arena, no other person in the whole world commanded that many followers, which ran into crores of people following him. So while it is not easy to talk on his ideas as they are highly diverse, I found while going through the books written by him and others that it is not difficult either, because fortunately all his ideas are unified with a single thread. As matters are made of fundamental particles like protons, neutrons, and electrons, Gandhi's ideas revolve around only one phenomenon, and that's called God. During his eventful life, people sometimes could not understand the reasons behind some of his actions, some of his decisions and thoughts. But these apparent contradictions disappear only if God is brought into the center stage. Dear listeners, I know that amongst you, there are three types of people with three types of mindsets. One who believes in God, called the theists. One who disbelieves in God, called the atheists. And the third is neutral, who do not care if God exists or not. They are called agnostics. Gandhi cannot be evaluated or understood, keeping God at bay. So whether or not you believe in God or you are neutral to God, I request you to go through this speech and listen to him, because in order to understand Gandhi, it is important to understand how he viewed God. Everything that he fought for, whether it is social injustice, freedom, cleanliness, augmenting village economy, self-reliance, God is always at the center as a driving force. What are Gandhi's ideas about God? Gandhi's writings are so lucid and clear about it that they need no elaboration. As Mother Ganga is worshipped only with the water of the Ganges, I wish to remember Gandhi only by his own words, most of my speech. Gandhi had his own understanding about God that is sometimes exactly not aligned with any particular sect. But he never wanted to impose this understanding on others. He said, like the 7 blind men giving different description about the elephant, they were all right from their respective points of view and wrong from the point of view of another. I very much like the doctrine of manyness of reality. I want to take the whole world in the embrace of my love. My anekantabad, that is manyness, is a result of this twin doctrine of satyagraha and ahimsa. So what is satyagraha? Satyagraha, people think that it is that you sit and then you press for the justice for any injustice that will be meted out. But why it is satya and agraha? That means inclination and the desire to follow truth. So truth is at the core of Gandhi. And when he talks about ahimsa, there also the truth is there. But what is truth? Some of us may think truth is speaking the truth. Truth is hearing the truth. But when he says truth, my experiment is truth. This truth is none other than God himself. And that's what he has told. And that is called absolute truth. And that's the Gandhi's concept and Gandhi's writing. We, the human families, are not all philosophers. He talks about that where the truth has to be found. Truth is everywhere. Truth is around wherever you see. Truth is in our heart. But truth, according to him, is also in temples. Somehow or the other, we want something. He says that why should people go to the temple or like to go to the temples or mosques or churches? He says we want something that we can touch, something we can see, something before which we can kneel down. It doesn't matter whether it is a book like Sikhism, praise to Guru Granth Sahib, or an empty stone building, or a stone building inhabited by numerous figures, wrote Gandhiji, he defended temple worship on the background. So while you feel God at the heart, but there is necessity for temple worship as well. That's what says Gandhi. So Gandhi admitted that he learned and evolved throughout his life. When asked on apparent contradiction on one single topic spoken at different times, Gandhi was humble enough to say, "Just please accept the one that is spoken later, because I became more knowledgeable by that time." So about God, as a matter of fact, he said that we are all thinking about the unthinkable, describing the indescribable, seeking to know the unknown, and that is why our speech falters, is inadequate, and often contradictory. If we exist, if our parents and their parents have existed, then it is proper to believe that in the parent of the whole creation, and if he is not, we are nowhere. And that is why all of us with one voice call one God differently. As Paramatma, somebody calls him Ishwar, somebody Shiva, Vishnu, Rama, Allah, Khoda, Jehovah, God, an infinite variety of names. But he is one and yet many. He is smaller than an atom, Gandhi writes, and bigger than the Himalayas. It is echoing the words of Upanishad, where it says, God is Honoranian, Mahato Mahyan, smaller than the smallest and larger than the largest. He is contained even in a drop of ocean, writes Gandhi, and yet not even 7 seas can encompass him. Reason is powerless to know him. He is beyond the reach or grasp of reason. Faith is essential in this matter. My logic can make and unmake innumerable hypotheses. An atheist might floor me in a debate, but my faith runs so deep in me, faster than my reason, that I can challenge the whole world and say, God is, was, and always shall be. Gandhi writes, to me, God is truth and love. So this is the truth God is. So my experiment with truth means that my experiment with God. But what is that experiment with God? That how God instructs him, how God guides him, how God leads him to different fields and to take different decisions, meet different people, and to accept the decisions and the opinions of different people. God is ethics to him. God is morality. Gandhi writes, God is fearlessness. God is the source of light and life, and yet is above and beyond all this. God is conscience. He is even the atheism of the atheist. For in his boundless love, God permits the atheist to live. Gandhi means that it is by God's will and the God's benediction that people live on this earth, and he eats and survives. So Gandhi continues, he is the searcher of hearts. He transcends speech and reason. He knows us and our hearts better than we do ourselves. He does not take us at our word, for he knows that we often do not mean it, some knowingly and others unknowingly. He is a personal God to those who need his personal presence. He writes that he is embodied to those who need his touch. He is the purest essence. He simply is to those who have faith. Upanishad also writes that asti iti eva upalabdhasya tattvabhava prasidati. When you feel that he is, automatically all knowledge and all the tattvas, everything about him comes to your heart. He alone is, Gandhi writes, and if we will be, we must eternally sing his praise and do his will. Let us dance to the tune of his bansi, his flute that comes from Vrindavan, and all would be well. Let me explain my position clearly. Gandhi feels that it is not his own power that drives him ahead. He feels that God has vouchsafed me with a priceless gift in the weapon of ahimsa. I and my ahimsa are on our trial today. And if in the present crisis, when the earth is being scorched by the loneliness of himsa and crying for deliverance, I fail to make use of this God-given talent, God will not forgive me, and I shall be judged unworthy of this great gift. I must act now. You see that all these words are telling that Gandhi's mind and Gandhi's heart was deeply entrenched in God. And not only that, because his family was devotee of Vishnu, there was a Vaishnava family, and he had the bead on his neck before he departed for England to study law. And he practiced what is called in Vaishnava literature, Vaishnava Shastra, as Sharanagati, or complete surrender to God. And those Sharanagati has got sixfold ways. That desire only in accordance with the desire of God. Do not desire against the desire of the God. Have found faith that God is protecting us. Keep an attitude of gratitude towards God. See everything that we possess as belonging to God. And Gandhi has used all these practices of Sharanagati in him when he led a political movement against the British, when he said, let the village be self-sufficient, when he said, you cannot do violence. Everything was embedded in these principles. Then why do ahimsa? Because he is also has got the same God in him as mine. So therefore, I cannot kill not only a person, I cannot do injustice to a person, I cannot kill an animal also. And you know that in Gujarat, which is the land of Jains, large numbers, and also Gandhi's family was Vaishnavas, and there are a large number of Vaishnavas. And so there is non-vegetarian. This vegetarianism is the one that is practiced there. And when Gandhi went to England, he in fact formed a group of vegetarianism. So all these practices made Gandhi really a person who had God. He applied the God and God's will in various ways, in various things. So if we want to be Gandhi, and if we want to follow Gandhi, even in the smallest way, we have to realize God in the smallest way as much as God. Because according to the Sanatan Dharma, that if God cannot be realized, may not be realized in one lifetime, but whole life is a journey, and in each life we'll be realizing God in a small way, so that after many, many lives, we reach near to the God and we realize His presence in us and in the world, in all around us. And Anjali has already told me to keep it very short. So I think that it is my bounden duty to follow her. So I would like to not to drag it, because there is infinite time that we can spend talking about God. I will conclude very quickly. The aim of life, Gandhi said, is what we should serve the power that has created us, and whose mercy and consent we depend on our breath by heartily serving. That means when he is serving the poor, he is serving his creation. That means love, not hate, which one sees very here. Man's ultimate aim is the realization of God and nothing else. And all his activities, social, political, religious, have to be guided by the ultimate aim, the vision of God. The immediate service of all human beings becomes a necessary part of the endeavor, simply because the only way to find God is to see Him in His creation and to be one with it. This can only be done by service to all. Of all the animal creations of God, man is the only animal who has been created in order that he may know his maker. Man's aim in life is not therefore to add from day to day to his material prospects and to his material possessions, but his predominant calling is from day to day to become nearer his own maker, the God. Man is not at peace with himself till he has become like unto God. I will end my speech with only one word, and you will all agree with me with Albert Einstein and what he told about Gandhi. He said that generations to come will scarce believe that such a one as this, ever in flesh and blood, walked upon this earth. So, ladies and gentlemen, that Mahatma Gandhi is the one who tried in every respect to follow Karma Yoga of enunciated in Srimad Bhagavad Gita by Lord Sri Krishna. And he is the one who has been appreciated and who has been followed by millions of people of India, and will continue to be followed around the world. If we want to become even a small particle of Gandhi, then we have to realize the essence of Gandhi, and that's God. With this prayer, I remain and end my speech. Thank you very much. Thank you all for listening to this speech. Thank you.
Swavlamban, Sarvodaya, Satya. To borrow from management speak, the three S's came together so wonderfully with the idea of Satya, morality, which seemed to connect Sarvodaya and Swavlamban in Gandhiji's ideas. I have questions for each of the speakers based on what you have said, but we're running short of time. So I'll keep my questions very short and very specific so that the speakers have more time to not only answer the questions, but also have a discussion among each other, because there seems to be a thread connecting all the three speeches. Globalization from below. Is it possible for us to share the fruits of globalization or of development with the local others, those of us who are enjoying the fruits of globalization? Is it possible for us to share them with the local others and in the true spirit of Sarvodaya? That's my first question to Professor Ghosh. And the second question came from what you said. You seem to say that the only way out of the only way to freedom through decolonization is to end our discursive indenturement to the West. And you seem to suggest that Sarvodaya is one way of stepping out of all the isms, to think outside of the Western discourse, and think of a way of developing our economies or of our polity, our democracies outside the discursive network of the West. So may I request you to answer these questions?
Very good questions, and I could spend 2 hours answering them. Obviously, don't want that. So I'll try to give you a 30-second version. The answer to the first question is yes. In last February, I was in Japan, and I had the privilege to go to very small towns. And what I noticed was something very interesting. These small towns were indeed the centers of what I would call the Gandhian excellence, where they're doing handicrafts, they're working on art. As you know, Japanese porcelain is all known all over the world. So if we could stimulate the right kind of excellence in the small villages and towns of India, which, by the way, I've been talking about, as you know, for the last 35 years, the answer is yes. And the role of the government is to sense the benchmark, the global benchmark. So the products coming out of the villages are indeed match and excel products coming out of other parts of the world. So we have to be competitive. But for a villager in middle of, say, Madhya Pradesh, to figure out what is competitive is hard. So that's where I think the two-way learning system, Dr. Banerjee, you were talking about, becomes very important. On one side, we have to learn the skills available, resident in various villages. On the other side, the role of the government would be to set the standards of excellence so the products, the services that we sell all over the world is truly appreciated. To a certain extent, I've also seen that in small towns of China, where people are very humble, very simple, but somehow the strategic guidance of the government, be at the province level or from Beijing, is at work. So their products become competitive, they get accepted, they get qualified. As you know, today China's manufacturing output is perhaps the highest in the world, so is its agricultural output. So there are models, we have to work on it, and it has to be focusing on excellence. So that's my first point. The answer is yes. And that's why we have to kind of modernize what Mahatma was talking about. Yes, we would be self-sufficient, but we are living in a networked economy where the whole world is a village. And how do we ensure the village in Bengal, the village in Kerala, or a village in Gujarat, they're all producing something unique to that place? So Bengali in Murshidabad silk, or the people were talking about the art in Bardhaman, would be different from the art in Gujarat. And we have to recognize that and celebrate that. So the answer is yes, in short. On the second one, if you can repeat the second one once again, because it was a bit deeper question, but if you could quickly touch on it.
Say that the way to end our indenturement to the West is to end our discursive indenturement. And Sarvodaya is one way out, because we're thinking outside all the isms. We're thinking of a model which doesn't refer to the Western isms at all, even though it dialogues with them, as you rightly pointed out, but it's something Gandhiji's contribution to 20th century thought was his way of thinking outside the West, outside the framework of the West. So is it possible to do that with Sarvodaya?
India, as you know, for the last 5,000 years, have given birth to a lot of different concepts, from zero to Sarvodaya to the Tagores and Vivekanandas. We have not been deficit in terms of ideas. Where we have been deficit is in execution. And that's another reason I think Kanchan's Leadership Academy, with help of Dr. Chaudhary, would be very important. That how to develop leadership in taking these great ideas, which has fermented in India through the ages, and execute in a way so the world could look up to. Now, when you look at the Western philosophies, the philosophers were able to convert them into action, which people embrace, and that led to the economic development. And so did Japan. And and China is doing right now, and some of the Southeast Asian countries. Now, what is the difference? And I've been searching for the answer to your question for many, many years, that it is the confidence in oneself. Again, goes back to Shavalambi, which Dr. Banerjee was talking about, that how to cultivate a confidence when you have the courage to appreciate who you are and your neighbor. Now, unfortunately, as you know, Satyajit Ray gets recognized when the French people appreciate Upu Shangshan. Then we say our Satyajit Ray. Rabindranath Tagore gets appreciated when Rabindranath Tagore gets Nobel Prize and comes back, then they say our Tagore. Vivekananda gets appreciated. If Vivekananda did not go to Chicago. So I think that is the fundamental constraint which is keeping the economic ferment that India needs, is the lack of confidence. Our mind has been colonized for years. It's not the British colonization, but all the way from the invasion of the Persians, the Turks, the Mughals to the British. India's fundamental, if you will, ethos in the heart, how the heart works, how the brain works, has become a bit fragile. It has been colonized because we appreciate people when he has got an external stamp. We cannot appreciate people based on how we, as individuals, the God in us, could appreciate the God in the other individual. Now, we talk about in Gita as beautifully Kanchan articulated. Similarly, Dr. Banerjee articulated the whole concept of self-reliance, but somehow we have difficulty appreciating an individual unless we quote Einstein or unless we quote someone from outside. I would like to appreciate someone because he is good based on my own courage. And that courage is what I would call we have to develop, that you know who you are and in the process be able to appreciate what is good, not because someone else has given you the stamp, someone from outside. And that is, I think, is holding back India. You don't see that in Japan. You don't see that in Germany. You don't see that in Taiwan. You don't see that in China. So I think if you look at all the countries which have done well, Switzerland to France to Germany to United Kingdom to United States, they have that self-confidence. They know how to appreciate someone based on their own criteria. And that's what I was talking about in terms of what we have to gain.
For answering the question so succinctly and so clearly. We'll have to move on to the next question because we're running short of time. My question to you, Mr. Banerjee, is the media guru, Marshall McLuhan, coined the notion of the global village, by which he's meant the idea of an ideal community, something you were talking about. So can the village, the smallest unit, can it be the model for self-reliance, Swavlamban, not only for the cities in India, but for the world in general? May I request you to answer that question, which you did touch upon in your speech, but the specific question, can the village show the route to the city and to the world at large?
It is a kind, matter of the way we look at it. If we look at them, which I had the opportunity in doing so, they have the excellent talent and the knowledge which traveled through ages. Now, the problem of our civilization today, post Gandhiji, post Rabindranath, post Vivekananda, even post Geddes, he worked in India, how to assimilate the coded and uncoded knowledge of India. The coded knowledge is every day insulting, suppressing the uncoded vast knowledge of India. India will be free. India will be free. India will come out with a new order. If we start, all the great intellectuals like you, if all of us start looking and identifying and analyzing the streams of uncoded knowledge, this is a tested truth. Whatever Gandhiji said, Mahatma, named as Rabindranath, the Mahatma, he realized, he went through all these micro-level aspects of creativity. And he gave a statement, looked like a macro, but it is actually a micro statement. So grassrooted. It is quite possible that India will have her own direction with this Atma Shakti. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Banerjee, for answering it so succinctly once again. Gaon chalo. Let's go back to the village. Gaon jana hai. Let's go back to the village. This is the hard lesson our urban population realized when the city became unlivable. Professor Chaudhary, I was wondering if you could think about Gandhiji as a rooted cosmopolitanism, which the Ghanaian philosopher Anthony Appiah coined the term, which means that you can be rooted in your own religion or your ethnic identity and yet reach out to the world. From what you said, it seemed like Gandhiji's being rooted in Hindu religion did not prevent him from reaching out to other religions and to the world, the entire world.
So actually, Gandhi was not was a cosmopolitan person, but he was rooted only in one place, that is the villages of India, because he always said, "I want to work for the dumb millions." And you will be surprised to see his writings. He writes that, like the colonial British and the town dwellers, and there are three entities he made: colonial British, town dwellers, and the dumb millions of the villages. And he equally held the town dwellers responsible for the woes and the miseries of these dumb millions. So therefore, it is the duty also, after more than 70 years of our 75 years or 73 years of our independence, to realize that we have not been spared by Gandhi's words. He has told that we are just too selfish because we want to get all the resources in town and cities. So believe me, Gandhi was a cosmopolitan person, his mind rooted in the villages of India. This is number one. Number two is that you will realize that Gandhi has mentioned about Anekantavad, that I mentioned, that manyness. He has said that you can pray in the temples where there are many figures. You can pray in an empty stone hall. You can pray also in a hall. And this is not something that, which is rooted to the Hindu religion. In fact, you may know that his eldest son converted to Muslim religion. But when he converted, he wrote, he never wanted to hide it. He rather wrote that I will love that if he leaves drinking habits, If conversion to Muslim religion makes him leave his drinking habit, I will be a very proud father. Let him do that. Let the Muslims tell me that he has left drinking after getting converted to Muslim. So he never was anything to do. In fact, he embraced all religion. At the same time, when I talk of Gita, the culture of India is Gita, Bhagavad, Ramayana, Mahabharata, and Upanishad. It is the culture. And the religion is somebody is different. So one has to distinguish between India's culture and India's religion. And if we mix these two, Hindu religion is not necessarily the India's culture. India's culture is strongly embedded in Ramayana and Mahabharata. And people can do all kinds of religious practices, whether it is a Parsi, whether it is a Muslim, whether it is a Hindu, that's free to do. And Gandhi was open to all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. We could go on listening to all of you forever. It has been so engrossing. Would any of the speakers like to have the final word before we close? And I request Professor Chattopadhyay to sum up the speeches. Professor Ghosh, yes.
Yeah. I want to really thank all of you. It was an educational session for me. I was a student. But what fermented in my mind, I thought, of a tremendous relevance, which is the concept of experiment. All the three speakers, I think, directly or indirectly talked about experiment. I think time has come, particularly in modern India, to experiment, because the last 73, 74 years have been a struggle. India is still not on the global stage as countries like China or countries like Japan has emerged, even Russia, Brazil. So I think we have to inject, and that's why, given that IIT Kharagpur hosted such a program, a bit more of experimental attitude so that we could indeed build on the great ideas which people like Gandhiji, Tagore, Vivekananda, and the Gita and the Ramayana and the Mahabharata offered. They're all there, but somehow we are not experimenting. We're taking the easy solutions from the West and we quickly implement, but there has to be some kind of internal soul searching that we should begin in reverence to Mahatma Gandhi on his 150th birthday. Thank you very much.
Instead of framing Gandhiji and paying lip service to his ideas, we have to follow his ideas. We have to make them come alive once again and to resuscitate them in the present world and make them relevant to the present world. If anyone among the audience would like to say something, I would invite them, but we're really running short of time. So if no one has anything to say, may I request, would anyone like to share their thoughts? Anyone present conclude? Okay, may I request Professor Chattopadhyay to sum up the main points in today's symposium as briefly as possible, because I'm sure everyone has other commitments, the speakers as well as our listeners who are listening to this symposium all across the world. And it's close to Indian dinner time, so I'm sure everyone is very hungry as well.
Professor Anjali Gera Roy, I will not dare to sum up what the speakers have said. I just want to soak into the expressions and impressions. They're so deep that I really just want to soak in them. And they were self-explanatory. The questions were answered so very well. So there is really nothing that I would like to add from my end. I just want to thank each and every one of you from the bottom of my heart. I would also like to thank our director, our deputy director, and our registrar for being with us in the entire session, so patiently listening to us. I would just request our registrar if he would like to give the vote of thanks.
This is already given that. You have given the water.
Okay. So I think then we will bring this extremely interesting e-symposium to a close. Thanks once again.